Recently, the SMBX community hosted a level design contest called the Vanillish Contest. It's a variant of the popular Vanilla contest where only built-in assets are allowed. There are a couple modifications to the Vanillish contest that allows you to use custom assets such as music or config files, while custom graphics are still disallowed. Since I haven't participated in one of these for a while, I figured why not give it a shot? So I created the level Scarlet Forest, in which you play as the Prism Fairy whose job it is to protect the forest from evil crabs. Originally my plan was to record a time-lapse of the creation process, but I used the wrong OBS setting during the first session, so the SMBX process is permanently stuck to the top left corner of the footage. So instead, I thought, why not create a making-of video where I go over the design process and some of the niche mechanics I used and considerations I had to make. Welcome to the making Part 1. Coming up with an idea. So I decided to make a level. Now, the problem is I had no ideas for what to make. I know that the Game Boy shader is a popular screen effect in these contests, so I started messing around with it to see if a palette would give me some kind of inspiration. There are some recently added Yoshi's House background objects, which let me spell yo and hi in the bushes by covering them up in creative ways. So that was kind of funny, but not exactly a level idea. I started looking into NPC configuration files, which are some of the custom assets that are allowed for this contest, and started creating some kind of bullet hell scenario which I figured might be fun to overcome using Link's projectile blocking shield. I made hammer bros that throw volcano lotus pollen, and then I immediately got sidetracked to make everything throw spiders. Behold, Spiders Bro, Spiders Blaster, Spiders Spike, and I even made a shoe Goomba that, instead of dropping a shoe, drops a spider. Someone please make this level. Anyway, after searching the documentation some more, I eventually struck upon an interesting configuration, where the Starman's duration could be extended arbitrarily. I dropped down an infinite duration Starman and a Tanuki suit for some reason, and started messing around. I don't know, but I was drawn to this little guy. The Tanuki suit lets Link turn into a statue, or into a fairy, which greatly improves his mobility. It does look a little bit buggy, so I immediately wrote some dialogue to lampshade it with a message box, and started making up some lore about the Prism Fairy, which is also why all the grammar in this level is absolute trash. There's just one issue with this, which is, how do you make an interesting level when the player is completely invincible? Part 2. Lava Crab. The number 2 thing you don't— Okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, there is another issue with Starman, which is the music. Whenever the player has Starman, they are legally obligated to listen to the Starman sound effect, which overrides all level music. And do I really want to subject players to this? The good news is that it is possible to override sound effects in SMBX by name, so I just rename my background music file to starman.og, and there we go, now it almost sounds like a real level, beside the fact that the music pauses whenever a message is displayed on screen, which is fine. Now, it is technically not allowed in the contest rules to replace sound effects, but since the music plays throughout the entire level, I'm just gonna hope the judges treat this as background music and not a sound effect, and don't disqualify me on a technicality. Anyway, back to gameplay. How do we make invincibility interesting? While Link is immune to most things in the Starman stage, he can still be knocked out of fairy mode by colliding with enemies, or be killed outright if he comes in contact with lava. Getting knocked out of fairy mode kind of sucks, so I don't want to build around it. And lava's visuals don't fit my level's aesthetic, and they emit an obnoxious glow, which I could remove via config, but I'll raise you one better. There is a block config flag called lava, which makes any block act like lava, and if I combine it with the NPC filter flag, I can turn any block into lava for only the player. Now if I put the lava block on a layer and attach the layer to an NPC, I have a moving hitbox that kills the player and follows the NPC. And to make it less obvious, I can make sure the configuration file is on an invisible block with this configuration, instead of a switch block. If I overlap it with a crab, now voila, that's a harmful crab. Now that I had an invincible obstacle that could kill the player, I just needed to make sure that when I place down a crab, I create a new layer for that crab with its own individual lava block and set it up to be attached to this lava layer. Perfect! Sounds easy enough. Except it's not perfect. Look at this. What you just saw is the SMBX attached to layer despawn glitch. See, when an NPC despawns, it resets its position to its spawn position immediately, but remains hidden until it comes back on screen. If it has an attached layer, this layer will also move back to the start position immediately, but since it has no concept of being spawned, it will just be an invisible active hitbox. NPCs despawn after 180 frames or 3 seconds, so I have to expect that players would run into this while playing the level normally. Thankfully, there is a solution to this. There is an NPC config flag for line-guided NPCs called Extended Despawn Timer, which ups the timer from 180 frames or 3 seconds to 3000 frames or 50 seconds. Surely no player will wait that long. So now my crabs don't despawn anymore, and as an added bonus they can move on line guides. And would you look at that, there is a use hidden lines config, so I don't even have to use any of the visible line guides, but I can just put them on a hidden layer. But I don't let the big crabs move on line guides because they buggy. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering why I decided to go with crabs, it's because they are funny. Part 3. Time to build the level. The first area of the level is the forest. One of the earliest structures I built was a temple with a locked gate, because I thought it would be interesting for the player to fetch a key and then return to the temple to get inside. Originally, this was right at the start of the level, but I wanted a little bit of a walk up to it, so I moved it a little bit further away. Here and here, we have some trees, which basically just block the player from flying over the entire level. Though I did hide a secret minigame on the left one, where you can just kind of like stand to plants until they die and then you get a moon for it. Nice! Here and there I added a couple of question mark blocks, but since you have Starman and Tanuki Suit, there is no point in placing power-ups in any of them, so instead I put birds in them. There's this section over here where you climb up a small ledge, after which you're no longer at the bottom edge of the section, meaning the camera will have enough space to center on the player vertically, which kind of ruins the framing of the level, because now half of what you end up seeing is dirt, and that just won't do. NPCs can trigger events when spawning. This is via the activate property. So I have these invisible triggers activate an event that resizes the camera boundary. If the camera has to move during this operation, the entire game would wait for the camera to readjust. So I place the triggers to come on screen while you're on this pipe, which is over 10 blocks away from the bottom of the camera region. So the camera doesn't have to move in order for the transition to happen, and it's entirely seamless. When going over the left edge of the pipe, there's a second set of triggers that get spawned, which would reset the camera back to its normal size. And each event is set up to toggle which of the triggers is visible. So if you're coming from the left, it's only the right triggers. If you're coming from the right, it's only the left triggers. So you can jump back and forth over the pipe as much as you want, and the camera will seamlessly adjust. Moving on to the shrine area where you find the key. I wanted there to be a surprise for the player that complicates the adventure. Clawgrip is able to pick up and throw objects, so he was the perfect man for the job. I spaced things out so that Clawgrip could throw the key into the hole, requiring the player to retrieve it like a small puppy dog. They go into the cave and head right for more shenanigans. Now, of course the player is also able to pick up the key mid-throw. In this scenario, the entire cave section is just skipped. There are 2 event chains happening here that make this possible. First, the key is set to activate a 4-second timer, after which the key and the claw grip are permanently hidden. This prevents the player from scrolling the key back on screen after it has been thrown and despawned. Second, the key has a death event hooked up that blocks out the paths through the cave and sets up all layers necessary for the skip. Since hiding the layer does not trigger the kill event, this creates a scenario where the only 2 options are the key ending up in the pit or ending up in the player's inventory. There is a small bug here, which I didn't manage to fix. See, a claw grip will only throw its held item if not set to friendly, and so far I've been relying on crabs being friendly to make them unkillable. But this one had to be killable, so I didn't care enough to fix it. So if you stab the crab over and over again, he'll simply vanish while still on screen lol. Now, I could fix this by simply replacing claw grip with a friendly claw grip after he's finished throwing the key, but I didn't want to time that, so it's fine. The cave section is next, and it is fairly short. I don't just want to throw the same tired old obstacles at the player that people have been doing forever, with enemies walking off ledges, walking between 2 walls, walking off ledges between two walls, or heck, even standing in place. So I lined the terrain with line guides for the crabs to crawl across. It makes them behave a little bit like spike tops or sparkies. Keep in mind that every unique crab in the level has a dedicated attached layer with invisible player-only lava on it. When you get to the end of the cave, you can collect the key. This key is placed on the right side of the screen for the same reason as the screen resize stuff from earlier, where I am resizing the camera to now be fixed to the last screen of the section and I want it to be seamless. After a few seconds, an autoscroller activates. Now, most people on the SMBX community still believe that in vanilla, autoscroll can only be achieved on level start and only in the first section. However, autoscroll can actually be achieved in any section in vanilla and at any time. You just have to match the section index with the index of the event in the events list. In my case, this is section 1, so counting from 0, P-switch start is the event with the matching index to the section. So a short while after collecting the key, I trigger P-switch start and activate the autoscroll back, which spawns a couple more crabs and a dragon coin. Yes, I just added an autoscroller so more people will be aware of this. Now, if you started the level from the cave checkpoint because you died to these crabs, there is an extra trigger outside the pipe back to the surface for smallening the camera boundary again. Here you can see how the game waits for the camera movement. It's only minor and during a pipe exit scene, so I kept it. If you go to the right, I also blocked off the hole to prevent looping, and make sure claw grip and the key don't reappear. Heading into the temple, I'm feeling like the level is heading towards its climax. I looked around for a background to use and found the SMP3 Bowser background to look pretty nice, but ordinarily it is anchored for Bowser to be visible and I didn't want to look at him. So I moved the entire level content down and used invisible triggers to clamp the top camera boundary, which is a trick that adds a whole new perspective for vanilla backgrounds. In the temple, I wanted to make use of the player's statue ability in some way, as it hasn't come in handy so far. So I started thinking of ways of using the player block top config to create an NPC that can only be destroyed by stomping on it with the statue, but this wasn't possible because whatever I tried, either it wouldn't get stomped, or it could also be downstabbed. I did find a cool interaction with Link and player block top springboards, however. What I did manage to figure out in the end was that I could resize the tier 3 power-up brick block to 2 pixels height and place it atop a detonator NPC to get the effect I wanted, which is a kind of pressure plate that the player could only press down by using the Tanuki statue ability. Then I placed down a couple generic obstacles before putting a final obstacle where I used the funny springboard trick I just told you about. Originally, I wanted these to all be small crabs, but since none of my small crabs ever despawn, that ended up being a lot of crabs that were loaded all at once, which caused my PC to lag, so I replaced them with big crabs, which is still kind of laggy, but hopefully it's fine. Now it's time to end the level. But I can't just end the level like this. There has to be a boss, else it'd be totally anticlimactic. After all, the prison fairy has been through so much to save the forest, and from what? If there's no boss, there's no point, so time to make a boss. The main issue here is that I have no idea for a boss. I'm not interested in making elaborate and well thought out vanilla boss battles using like Mother Brain and events and everything. So my first idea was to just make a joke boss where touching the boss destroys it immediately. I also had some other ideas like using the plunger trick from before with the Tanuki statue, or having another autoscroller where you escape the temple. In the end, I ended up doing sort of a joke boss that is still kind of a real boss up to a point. Step 1 was to create a line guide path that simulates the movement of rebounding potobos for the boss, since I wanted some crabs that move around the arena just like potobos. Step 2 was to create 23 events that trigger each other on an elaborate effect for the HP bars spawning one crab at a time. I embellished the HP bar with these letters H and P, which are accomplished using particle files, which access the built-in sprite for the message box text hardcoded 453.png. Step 3 is the big crab itself. It is yet another claw grip with overlapping player solid lava, but additionally I added reverse power-up blocks that are non-solid to the player, which advance an invisible NPC solid lava slope block. This lava slope starts on the left side of the HP bar and will kill one crab every time the boss is hit, up till the last crab is defeated and the boss reaches 0 HP. However, this fight sucked, and there was no reason for the player to suddenly be able to stab crabs, so I replaced the power-up reserve blocks with my 2 pixel tall tier 3 power-up blocks, and added a means for the player to get Link's laser power-up, which is a different way to destroy them other than the Tanuki statue. Then in the pre-battle dialogue, I said that the crab is allergic to lasers, and now one strike from the laser depletes the entire HP bar at once, because allergies are no joke. And so the level was complete. It's not particularly challenging, but there's always something happening, so I hope it is interesting in its content density. And I hope players enjoy dissecting the different techniques that went into making it. If I end up winning the contest, then it's rigged. I mean, they don't even allow custom sound effects.